you ready to ride on the doom train?
Choo-choo!
Welcome to Doom Debates. This is part 2 of my 2-part conversation with Liam Robbins. Part 1, in case you missed it, was all about the college experience in the era of AGI. Highly recommend checking that out. Part 2 is going to be all about riding the doom train and seeing if we can reconcile our respective P-dooms. All right, let's dive in. So to kick things off, let's skip to the end here. What is your P-doom?
So, my P-doom...
P-doom, what's your P-doom? What's your P-doom? What's your P-doom?
is around 3%.
Okay. And we're going to calculate how we got to 3% by riding stop by stop, and you'll assign a probability to getting off on each stop or not getting off each stop, and doing that kind of multiplication is fraught with peril, but at least it's like a rough approximation. So let's get to the first stop here. AGI isn't coming soon. What do you think?
15%.
Okay, so basically you're going to stay on the train with 85% probability. You're just giving a little bit of probability to like maybe there'll be another winter or something, correct?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay, I think that's actually very reasonable. I don't even think my own probability is that different. Next stop, artificial intelligence can't go far beyond human intelligence.
1%.
So you're very convinced that surely there's a bunch of headroom?
I think so. I think that if we can get to AGI, we will probably also get to like really superhuman stuff pretty shortly thereafter.
Great. Next stop, AI won't be a physical threat.
Also 1%.
So like it clearly can physically threaten us if it has sufficient intelligence.
Yes, I think if there is a super intelligent system that wants us dead, it will find a way to do that.
I agree. All right, the next stop is intelligence yields moral goodness.
I put this one at 30%, but I'm just very unconfident either way. It's just more of a philosophical position than anything that can be really empirically tested at the moment.
Well, I'm at 2%, so this is a substantive disagreement here. I just don't even see a plausible reason why AI that's programmed using, let's say, reinforcement learning, right? That's trained using reinforcement learning. Why would it just learn anything other than that which is reinforced?
Well, if you believe in, say, moral realism, then there is an objectively correct morality out there that a hyper-intelligent being could fall upon. And then if it, in its training, knows for sure that empirically, yes, this is morality,
right?
Then maybe
so you're unconfident about moral realism, right? You're like giving it a window of opportunity that maybe it's true, and that's why you're unconfident.
Correct.
So to me, moral realism is obviously false because, I mean, unless you just want to say there's this platonic morality that exists, but it's causally impotent, it just doesn't affect the causal world. It's just like there, but you just can never know that it's there because knowing that it's there would be causally entangling yourself with it, and it's causally impotent, so like only God knows. But then at that point, it's like it's kind of becoming a meaningless concept, right? Like, what is the connection? How does somebody how does somebody that is made out of atoms access, right, physically interact with this moral reality? How does that work?
I mean, I think that is very plausible. If I wanted to steelman the moral realism position, I could just say that, well, look, the sort of less intelligent beings on Earth don't seem to have any morality at all. They just do what's in their immediate material self-interest. And even in more primitive human societies, morality basically just revolved around, you know, what's good for my family or my tribe. It seems like as we've gotten more intelligent and had more advanced moral systems, we've gotten things like moral universalism that remains true no matter who you are, and where even people in wildly different situations and with wildly different self-interests can still converge on, okay, but this is a moral course of action. And maybe if you just kept scaling intelligence, then you would find even more agreement in that vein.
So to be fair, I think a lot of people listening, a lot of the population, and even Scott Sumner, who's clearly very intelligent, what you just said now has like a lot of people who think that you're making sense, even though from my position, you're obviously not. like I feel very confident, that's why it's like the difference between like 2% and 30%. So just to repeat back what I'm hearing, you're basically saying, I believe there's a trend where like smarter people and smarter animals seem to behave more morally. And a candidate explanation for that trend is that they're somehow interfacing with this fundamental thing in the universe that is making them be moral. And they're establishing a causal connection. So like their neurons have essentially like a physical connection, like some law of physics that says that a neuron in a brain can tap into moral realism. I mean, what exactly, you're acting like there's a connection between your observation of smarter people being more moral and this hypothesis that like the universe fundamentally has morality. But my question for you is, what's the mechanism of connection here?
Trying to think how I would explain this. And again, my background is not philosophy, so I'm sure that other people could explain this much better. But I think that if you truly understand just the nature of sentience and how that feels to people, you might just inherently at that point want to say that, okay, sentient beings should be treated well and should not suffer. And also, if you understand the scale of how strongly each sentient being feels and the number of each of them, you might converge on a moral system closer to that.
But don't you think a handful of psychopaths exist that are smarter than 99% of the human population, and they truly enjoy watching people die and torturing them? So the existence of those people, doesn't that imply that you could similarly get to an AI that is similarly psychopathic and there's no fix, right? Like psychopaths don't one day wake up and it's like, oh, I was wrong, let me change. They're just psychopaths their whole lives.
Sure, I think that is plausibly true. In fact, I think that's more likely true than not. I think that the converse, that, more likely than not, an AI will just generally be oriented toward the good. I would put that at 30% probability.
So it sounds like, we can distinguish the strong orthogonality thesis from the weak orthogonality thesis. It sounds like you're pretty on board with the weak orthogonality thesis, which says that it's possible in the space of algorithms to have algorithms that are like human psychopaths, except even more intelligent, right? Like an arbitrarily intelligent psychopath, that algorithm does exist. And the only contention between us would be the strong orthogonality thesis, which is the question of like, how likely are we to go and pluck that algorithm out?
Yeah, sure. Like I'll say that, among the smartest human beings on the planet, probably upwards of 95% of them are like generally moral and upstanding people, and probably less than 5% are psychopaths. And so I think that just if you have this really super intelligent AI system and also moral realism is true, then, or true in some sense, then yeah, 95% chance that the AI will do what it knows to be morally correct.
Okay, if you look at why psychopaths exist in the human population, I think it's pretty convincing to assert that they exist because of this game theory explanation where it's like, if you're playing like the prisoner's dilemma and, tit for tat is like a good strategy where you like cooperate with people who cooperate with you and otherwise defect. But once you get a society of people who are like very willing to initially cooperate, there's this other strategy that emerges where you can like exploit them a little bit by playing one-shot games with them and then defecting more. And that's why you get like a small percentage of psychopaths. Like they do well in societies where they're not that many psychopaths. So don't you think that would be like a really convincing explanation why you can just have the first AI come online and just have its way with humanity, like throw us in the garbage?
I mean, that could be true. Again, I'm not an expert in evolutionary psychology, but I feel like if that was the only reason, then we would actually see far more psychopaths than we really do. We would see far more people who maybe outwardly pretend to care about morality, but really they are just psychopaths.
I think the logic of the game theory there is, and I'm not an expert on this, but once you get too many psychopaths, you get like a low trust society. So then people like check more rigorously whether you're willing to cooperate the first time. But once trust levels get really, really high, then somebody born with like no moral compunctions does better. Now, don't get me wrong. I actually think that if you're a psychopath and you're not extremely intelligent, you're likely to eventually get caught and like eventually leave a sour taste in people's mouths. So it's not that easy to be a successful psychopath. but like the optimal number of psychopath gene frequency in a population is like a small number. I mean, I find that very plausible because I mean, you can always take it to the extreme, right? You can imagine like a really, really high trust where there's so much value created from the high trust, but at the same time, you're increasing the incentive to have a psychopath come in and exploit it. So it does seem like that makes a lot of sense to me as an equilibrium. And remember, the reason I'm bringing all of this up is because when you're observing the statistics in the human population of, of people's moral tendencies, keep in mind that the statistics very much come from these kind of game theory strategies, right? And also specifically, an AI is going to be more powerful than a human psychopath. So an AI doesn't really have dependencies on people the way that a psychopath still needs other people to help him out.
All right. Again, this is not like a very strong conviction I have, and I think you could plausibly argue me down to like 20% or even 15% that like intelligence yields moral goodness. I just think it's like much more plausible than you're giving it credit for.
This is probably the first time in the podcast 1-year history where somebody has said, you know what, I am going to significantly update one of my belief probabilities. Wow, good on you.
Well, maybe. I'll caution that until I do that, I would want to talk to someone who's really pro
sure.
Intelligence yields moral goodness, and then see if their argument is more convincing to me.
Yeah, I mean, just so take it for what it's worth, right? From my perspective, this is hardly even a question, because this whole concept of morality, like we have a causal explanation for how it got into our brains, right? Like when we reflect on why we're moral, it's really not mysterious. Like we can explain, non-zero sum dynamics. If every time that I gave you $1, I had to lose $1, right? If there's no such thing as like a trade that was mutually beneficial, then we wouldn't have evolved morality and we would become less moral. When you put humans in a situation where all the trades are purely zero sum, very quickly you see that they learn to not be generous, right? So we can see the pressures that led to this equilibrium of what we call morality. And it's not a hard counterfactual from my perspective to be like, okay, so without those pressures, you don't get the morality we're familiar with. Like, I don't get why some people are still hanging on to this idea that intelligence yields moral goodness. But yeah, I mean, that's just me, right? I guess we've kind of beaten the dead horse.
Yeah, I think we can move on.
All right. Next stop on the doom train, we have a safe AI development process.
So I put this at 20%, but I'd like to clarify what I mean by that. Because like, the statement itself, I think, was a bit unclear. So I basically reinterpreted this as saying that, okay, assuming that a misaligned AGI emerges and maybe tries to take over the world, will we be able to stop it in time?
Right.
And that's a different question from, are the AI companies acting responsibly, which I think anyone who's followed the news can tell you that's not really true. But even a company that's acting irresponsibly and is cutting corners on AI safety could still maybe pull through and, stop the bad AI should it emerge.
Right. So the safe development process could just be like, let all the different companies do whatever they want to do with minimal oversight, but then just notice if they're getting out of control and just go order them to shut down. And even just that process of like keeping an eye on them and telling them to shut down, maybe that is a sufficiently safe process if things don't get out of hand.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, 20% seems a little bit optimistic, but I don't think it's crazy, right? I think this is an area where there's major unknown unknowns. Like, I mean, even like when you said 15% AGI isn't coming soon, I think we have to allow for that tail risk or tail opportunity where it's like, things just slow down and become comfortable. I mean, in some sense, we're lucky to even just had this like these last few years where it's, it didn't take a tiny amount of time. Like at least we have a few years to watch it play out, and that's already better than our worst fears. So maybe it'll just like take a long time and we can like get scared and stop it and things just won't be too fast. So I agree with you there. 20% is like not crazy. I don't have like a huge quibble with that. You do agree with me that it's not like off buttons are that natural of a thing to expect, right? Like, like when Neil deGrasse Tyson is like, I'm not scared because I can just shoot the AI with a gun. I think that doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah, no, that does not make sense. It will be substantially more involved and more complicated than that, which is why I don't think it will work in all likelihood, but I think it's plausible.
I mean, I naturally just compare it to a computer virus in order to get rid of the off button intuition, right? Like, does a virus have an off button? If it was explicitly programmed in, yes, but those off buttons often have a way of breaking.
Yeah, I would agree.
All right, next stop on the doom train, AI capabilities will rise at a manageable pace.
Again, not entirely clear what that statement means. I'm just going to lump it in with the last one and say that
Yeah.
should something bad happen, we'll be able to manage it 20%.
Exactly. And I should really clarify for the viewers, when I split up the stops in the doom train, I don't think that I've done such a precise job that you can treat them as independent events in this rigorous mathematical sense and you can multiply them together. I just don't think it'll work like that. It would be really awesome if it did. Maybe AIs can get really good at factoring complex reality like that, but I suspect they wouldn't have like 11 stops like I do. They would have like 11,000 stops. Like they would really make a dense graph. Yeah.
Conditional on you've done this very specific thing in this very specific order, what comes next.
Exactly. And I think we've learned a lot about how that is like how real brains work, right? Is they just have like so many neurons that model so many different things in a way that you just can't print out a short summary of. And that's kind of how the real reasoning gets done, right? That's like what we've learned from these large language models, having all this common sense at a massive scale. All right, well, let's just move on then, because we did kind of talk about AI capabilities rising at a manageable pace when we talked about other stops. All right, so let's move on to AI won't try to conquer the universe.
So I now have this at 25%. Previously, I had it at 50%. And in particular, I split this into 3 separate possibilities of why AI would not try to conquer the universe.
Mm-hmm.
Possibility 1 is just that the AI is not truly agentic. It does not have any inherent motivations or goals that it wants to pursue. Possibility B is that it has goals, but those goals are simply just aligned to human goals by default.
Mm-hmm.
And then possibility C is that its goals are what I call non-expansionary, where it wants to do something or maybe take over part of the universe, but will leave the rest of the universe alone.
I agree that AI totally will be agentic because we're already seeing that today, right?
Yeah, and I put that at like 2% that it's just not going to be agentic, which, yeah, seems pretty negligible in my mind.
Right. And to take your third one, the idea of misaligned but not expansionary, even 8% seems a little bit optimistic to me, that you think there's an 8% chance that we can escape that way. But I mean, 8% is low enough where it's like, it's really hard to quibble. Let's focus on number 2, where you think there's a very significant hope, or 7B as you call it. There's a very significant hope that by default AGI will be aligned to human interests. So, okay.
Yes. I currently have that one at 15%. As of like 3 weeks ago, I had it at 40%. But then I read Anthropic's agentic misalignment paper, and I'm like, yeah, this already just countered a bunch of the counter arguments I was going to make. Wow. So I'm down to 15 after reading that.
Well, good on you for updating, man. So, I mean, you're clearly not ideological. Like, you're actually trying to balance a mental model. This is actually one of the key learnings of rationality and of Bayesian reasoning is an intelligent agent, a rational agent. You go into the world and you're always doing this dance. You're like the dance of a martial art where evidence keeps streaming in and you keep trying to do the steps of the dance that are the right steps corresponding to the evidence that's coming in. That's how you do it, right? You shouldn't expect to like plow through the world with this unchanging worldview. So good on you for that.
Yeah, I think that some people started off with just this prior that alignment by default totally couldn't be true, like close to 0%, for, reasons that Yudkowsky gave like 20 years ago. I started out with, alignment by default is probably true, just because I don't think there's really any a priori reason why that shouldn't be the case. But then just empirically, we've actually seen people trying to test more and more advanced AI systems. And yes, experimentally, we've seen actually they are misaligned.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's a way that I would factor this differently from how you factored it, because my next stop on the doom train is super alignment is a tractable problem. And when you talk about alignment, I think it's the same thing as me talking about super alignment. We're just talking about the alignment that matters, not like, oh, alignments of I made it not say curse words. Like that doesn't, we care about the alignment of when it's super intelligent, what it actually does with the universe. So wouldn't you then say AGI will be aligned to human interest? Wouldn't you just go put that probability into the next step and not in the AI won't try to conquer the universe step?
So I think I'm making the distinction between alignment by default, that like barring a really concentrated effort to align AI systems, they just will basically be aligned to what we want them to do. And then the second question is, okay, even if it starts out misaligned by default, if we put enough energy and resources and thought into aligning it, can we do that?
I see. So you factored it into alignment by default versus not default, but then we solve it.
Yes.
Ah, I see. That's an interesting distinction, right? Like, will it be aligned if we don't try? And then, okay, maybe it won't be, but then if we do try, okay, I see what you're saying. So you factored it that way. Yeah, I mean, that's a reasonable factoring of it. All right, and you've now lowered your probability to 15% that it'll be aligned by default. Okay, I mean, that's getting into the low range where I don't feel like I have to argue with it too much. So then going to super alignment is a tractable problem. The next stop on the doom train. Are you still at 20% for that?
Yes, I'm still at 20% for that
Mhm.
one.
I mean, I think that's reasonable. I certainly think it would be tractable if we just had like a lot of tries, right? If we can just like save the state of the universe and reset and be like, oh, let me try to align it again, like again and again and again. Like eventually we'd get it, right? It's just what makes it dangerous is just that you're overconfident once and then it's like game over.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons. I'm not even confident that if we had a ton and ton of tries that we could do it. Like, it might just be a totally intractable problem where if you have a less intelligent species trying to align a more intelligent species, there's just no way that that could ever possibly work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not going to quibble with you too much there, but let's go to the next one here. Once we solve super alignment, we'll enjoy peace.
That's like a very rough 80%. That's an 80% based on like vibes.
Uh-huh.
I'm tempted to put it higher than 80%, but
Wow. So you really think that if we just have, if anybody has the ability to use an AI which is aligned to them, then you think like the balance of everybody using their aligned AIs will be like peaceful enough?
pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to reason past that point, certainly because I personally am like, wow, that's already a better scenario than I hope for. The obvious argument for me that we wouldn't have peace is because I model it as like everybody has this magic wand where they can basically say the state of an outcome and then like snap their fingers and the outcome happens. But it's kind of like this genie that's like, okay, you got that outcome that you wanted, but I didn't, when it was helping you, maybe this is the premise of the problem, but like when it helps you, what if it doesn't care about other people as it's helping you? And you kind of screw over other people when you're getting your wish.
I mean, that's possible. I think just one way we could maybe avoid that is like, say there's one like really giant AGI, like controlled by the US government, let's say. And that AGI basically just watches over everyone. And you are allowed to have a personal AGI that does everything you want unless it, negatively impacts somebody else. At which point the bigger AGI steps in and, does what governments always do, and it mediates interpersonal disputes.
Right. So I agree in a situation where like Anthropic races ahead, solves super alignment and says, okay, we're going to have this one singleton. It's going to rule the world, but it's going to be like a client server model where it'll just respond to requests from everybody and just like balance everybody's priorities. And that'll be how heaven works. It'll be like this computer time sharing model of heaven. That is actually plausible, assuming that the AI really understands the assignment of what it means to have like a flourishing heaven and distributes it to every human like that. Now, the part that is more scary to me is imagine that the United States has one of these highly aligned superintelligent AI, and then let's say China has one of these aligned superintelligent AIs. But if the United States says, hey, superintelligent AI, do you think that we could just gain dominance over China? And it might say something like, well, right now you guys are a little bit ahead in the lead. I'm actually a little bit more powerful and intelligent than their AI. So yes, it is actually possible for me to go do a strike and like permanently seize control of the future for the US. This is why I'm not convinced about the once we solve super alignment, we'll enjoy peace, right? I think any kind of asymmetry can create really massive instability.
I mean, I think like the scenario you're outlining where there's multiple competing ASIs and they're of roughly equal strength to each other, and like it takes a substantial amount of effort for them to battle against each other. Like that seems like a very negligible possibility in my mind. I just think that like the first most advanced ASI will just totally take over and will totally be able to wipe out any competition. And, whoever controls that will be able to set the course of the universe going from there.
That's an interesting guess about how things will play out, right? So the idea is like if we in China and I don't even know what other country is getting really close, Saudi Arabia, Europe.
Either an American-led ASI or a Chinese-led ASI or just a total misaligned ASI, any of those three are way more probable than the competing ASI possibility.
Right, because the idea is just that if a bunch of people have their own super powerful ASI that only cares about them or their country and not other countries, even in that scenario, you'll pretty quickly have a lead open up where that lead just becomes like permanently dominant. And then in that case, the aligned AI will know that the winning country cares a little bit about the other countries, so it shouldn't go torture the other countries. And then we all live happily ever after. Some of us more happy than others, but we're all pretty happy.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, I do find that plausible. Like, personally, my main concern is that I think that all of humanity will be left in the dust soon in the near future once the AIs take off and recursively self improve and become uncontrollable. So I don't even think we'll get to fail in this cool way where, like, some of us have a helpful ASI and then there's chaos.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is conditional on aligned ASI.
Right, exactly. Okay, very fair. So you're putting 80% at once we solve super alignment, we'll enjoy peace. Seems a little high to me, but you've explained it reasonably. Let's go on to unaligned ASI will spare us.
That's at like 1%. That I think is just cope at that point.
Yeah. I agree. And but, even though it's Cope, so many people on my show, I think Mike Isertel is probably the most notable guest to be like, imagine you have an ASI that only cares about self-preservation. It's still going to want to study us. It's not going to want to disturb the planet with 8 billion humans on it. And you're like, hell no, right?
Yeah, no.
Okay, I agree with you then. Let's move on. Okay, this is the last stop on my doom train, which is AI doomerism is bad epistemology.
So for that one, I say a couple of things. Sort of, yes, like it's just very hard for any of us to like wrap our minds around this. It's hard to know who exactly is an expert in this. And in fact, trying to forecast the future of AI requires expertise in a lot of fields that it seems like nobody is an expert in all of those fields.
Mm-hmm.
And also just forecasting the future in any event is pretty difficult. Plus, for some of these questions, we've started to be able to empirically test them, but for a lot of them, it's still just entirely speculative. So I just don't put a lot of stock one way or another in like anyone's ability to predict the future on this.
So I agree with you that forecasting in general is hard, and it's hard to be 90% sure or even 60% sure about complicated things. But that doesn't mean it's bad epistemology, right? Like using a prediction market and be like, I wonder what's the probability that this war will break out or that war will break out. I don't know. It's hard to know. That doesn't mean that the act of trying to predict is bad epistemology. The people who argue it's bad epistemology, they say stuff like, you can never predict the end of the world. Any doomer is always wrong. Like you have to be an optimist. I mean, those are the kinds of arguments that are attacking the very epistemology.
Like when I say, like AI doomerism is bad epistemology, like AI anti-doomerism is also like bad epistemology for the exact same reasons. Like saying it either will or won't happen, you run into the same issues where it's just very hard to predict these things. So I don't think this would like update me one way or the other.
Right. Okay. I mean, this is getting nitpicky on my part, but there is a distinction between like how you're operating epistemology and like declaring what types of reasoning are valid compared to disagreements about the actual beliefs, right? Like object level versus meta epistemology level. I think you and I are both on the same page that like it's perfectly fine and normal to apply the epistemology of prediction, the way we'd predict anything, to predict doom, right? I think you and I are on that page. We can just disagree on like, well, who's doing a better job of predicting doom?
I agree.
Okay, great. Yeah, so you don't really get off on the epistemology stop then. It just seems like you get off on some of the other stops, which are about like, well, the actual object level beliefs. Some of them aren't well supported, and as a result, you don't have a super high or a super low p-doom. So remind us, where does your p-doom net out?
So, okay. If you actually multiply all those numbers together, and at this point, you can show a picture of like the flow chart I made. If you multiply all those numbers together, it shows my p-doom at like 38%, which is not that out of the norm from your p-doom, I don't believe.
Right, yeah. I mean, 38% is totally in what I call the sane zone. I'm happy with anybody who says anything from 10 to 90. It's like, yeah, close enough. I don't see that much value in quibbling from, let's say, somebody with 20 versus 60. It's like, yeah, whatever. And when I say minus 50, I don't think somebody whose p-doom is 40 is being dumb at all. All right. If anything, maybe I'm dumber than them. I can't tell. I just think that somebody who says their p-doom is like 4%, I just strongly suspect that they are, in fact, being dumb.
So here's the main thing where we differ. Is like, this is my sort of inside view from first principles attempt to make my like prior belief about p-doom. And like, if I was just in a room by myself where there was no other network of people or record of historical events, this is the number I would come up with. But I think there's several factors that I would then apply to that 38% number that then substantially drop me down. And I list 3 of them in my blog post. Number 1 is just the general heuristic that humanity won't be doomed by the scary new technology. Because plenty of people have predicted doom at various points in the past, and none of those previous doom predictions have panned out, which gives me some reason, not a very strong reason, but some reason to lower my P-doom from what it would otherwise be.
Uh-huh.
Then, more importantly than that, Superforecasters think will be fine. Like, when Superforecasters have been asked this question of what is your P-doom, they put very low numbers. I believe, I forgot off the top of my head, but something like, 1 in 1,000 is like the median super forecaster estimate for AI doom by the year 2100.
Yeah, well, I might quibble with that, but maybe get to your third base factor that you want to apply.
The third is that insiders in leading AI companies, as well as in the government, seem to think that we'll be fine, at least by outward indications. And I know that this is a bit more fraught because obviously they're incentivized. At a leading AI company, you have an incentive to cover up doom or to sort of ignore the problem. But I still think that people at leading AI companies are not suicidal. And if they really thought that, AI doom is likely to happen, then they would say so, and they would not be rushing forth as quickly as they are.
All right. So those are your 3 factors. And again, it's great that you're reasoning like this. Anytime you can make your reasoning explicit so we can look at it, I do think that's a productive exercise. I have to caveat, though, just like the stops on the doom train don't straightforwardly multiply out the way independent events do. There's really no simple math you can do with them, unfortunately, because it'd be nice if you could. Similarly, when you're introducing these extra base factors, right, you're smuggling in a lot of mathematical assumptions, right? You're saying well, these are independent base factors. And also they're kind of the only base factors we need to consider. Cause here, let me lob in a base factor, right? How about the base factor that Earth regularly has extinctions?
I wouldn't say regularly. Every couple
it's had
million
6,
years.
yeah. But every time something gets interesting, right? Anytime there's some global phenomenon happens, there's a significant probability that it's extinction related. For example, when the atmosphere changed to be oxygen rich, I think that drove one of the extinctions.
I mean, that would definitely update me on, for some reason, humanity might go extinct sometime in the next 1,000 years, but humanity will go extinct of this particular thing in the next 20 years. That does not seem particularly strong evidence to me.
So, my meta point here was just that you've selected these 3 base factors and you've just thrown them all into the stew. But I bet if you and I both brainstorm for a while, we could probably think of something else to throw in the stew, which would multiply you back up. So this idea of let me think of a few things to throw in and we'll multiply, maybe it's better than nothing. It's an interesting exercise, but it's not going to yield this answer that you can trust, correct?
I mean, I agree. I'm very not confident in my predictions. If I were to put 95% error bars on my P-doom, those 95 error bars would go everywhere from probably 1 in 1,000 to 80% or 90%. I just think that I didn't deliberately choose these 3 factors because I wanted to bring my P-doom down by an order of magnitude. It's just that these are, I think, the most relevant factors that I would put on top of just my initial reasoning.
What if you forget the math for a second, right? Just now you've done the analysis, you have trained your mind to have all these considerations. They've carved paths into your neurons. But now just close your eyes and just let your intuition respond, right? Having synthesized everything, what is your intuitive P-doom?
Well, my intuitive P-doom is 3%.
Well, that's interesting that taking your 38% and then applying those 3 base factors got you to an end result that's consistent with your intuitive P-doom.
I mean, it's definitely interesting, and I can fully understand from your perspective, oh, am I just engaging in motivated reasoning here to give some reason to explain what I believed previously? But I think it's actually the causation goes the other way around, where I was already thinking basically with these Bayes factors, and that's why my intuition was 3%.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I mean that's fair enough. Like it's possible that you have in fact spelled out the moving parts underlying your intuition or like a good approximation of those. So let me go tackle those particular Bayes factor because I think I've already touched on the point of like there's like so many other factors we could mix into stew. So you got to make sure that you've selected like all of them that matter. But let's just go one by one. And maybe that's my other argument is that I'm not on board with the individual factors. So like when you say humanity won't be doomed is a good historical heuristic. So my beef with that isn't that it's wrong. I mean, clearly it's right. So one beef would just be the selection argument or the anthropic argument of like, how could we possibly be in a position to be like, oh yeah, extinction of humanity happens all the time, right? I mean, we can only look to other evidence.
I mean, I'm not sure whether multiverse theory is true or not, but like it's totally possible that we're just living in an unlikely multiverse or like an unlikely universe within the multiverse where humanity lived to the year 2025. And actually there's plenty of universes in that same multiverse where we got extinct long before this point. So that's my least strong of the three Bayes factors.
If you want to treat something like a Bayes factor, which, and by the way, I think when you say Bayes factor, I think this is basically the concept of like a likelihood ratio or an odds ratio, right? So like if something is, to be precise, like if you have two competing hypotheses and the observed evidence is 3 times more likely in a world where hypothesis 2 is true compared to a world where hypothesis 1 is true, then you get to multiply your current belief odds ratio by 3. Like this is actually like a kind of intuitive way to do Bayes where you do actually get to multiply these factors and the math is actually kind of simple. And it sounds like you're kind of turning to similar math when you're throwing in these multipliers, right?
Sure. And in particular, my Bayes factor of humanity won't be doomed is 0.75. So like whatever, odds I had just intuitively that humanity will be doomed, I'm just going to multiply that by 0.75 to say, well, this heuristic says it probably won't be.
So if you're treating us not having already gone extinct as a piece of evidence, you have to make sure that it really qualifies as evidence, meaning in a world where humanity goes extinct in 2027, in that kind of world, what would you observe leading up to 2027? And then compare in a world where the humanity doesn't go extinct for a very long time after 2027, what would the world look like leading up to 2027? And in both of those worlds, wouldn't you still just observe, hey, humanity's never gone extinct before?
Yeah. Yeah, you are right about that. I think, okay, I was probably incorrect to call it a Bayes factor because that's not like properly Bayesian reasoning. But I do still think I should factor that in somewhere in my analysis.
There's some way to still man the point, right? Like the idea of like, look, every day we all wake up and we're still alive, and it's just like rare for us to be like, nope, you're definitely dying tomorrow. But like, I mean, the problem with that logic though is that like, imagine you just got sentenced to be hanged, right? And your hanging day's tomorrow, right? So it's just like at some point you just have to like ignore that logic.
I would agree. I would agree. And maybe, you've convinced me to like bump it up to like, I don't know, 0.8 or 0.85 instead of 0.75.
Okay.
But I still think it's worth considering.
Game of inches over here. All right. So the next one is Superforecasters think will probably be fine. So this is always interesting to look at, right? Because we know that across many domains, superforecaster, it's like a real skill. It's like you got to respect super forecasting ability. So if somebody comes up to me and is like, hey, the superforecasters are unanimously agreeing or like almost unanimously agreeing that P doom is like super low, like you're saying just 0.12%. It's hard for me to dismiss that, right? I don't want to offhandedly dismiss the super forecasters. However, I think that there's suspicion on like which groups of super forecasters are doing this when. So there's a Max Tegmark tweet from a couple years ago where he says, one of the world's best forecasting groups, Samotsveti, does that mean anything to you?
Yes, it does.
Okay, so that's a forecasting group. They just estimated that the chance of AI catastrophe is 32%. Dropping in half if there's good safety regulation. So maybe it could be as low as 16%. So it's not like all groups of super forecasters are all unanimous, right? I mean, is that a fair assessment?
I would want to spend some time reading this particular paper because this is news to me. And like, if it really does turn out that like, actually there's a substantial portion of super forecasters who do believe in AI doom, or that, one study we've been referencing, it was a study in 2023 where they got a bunch of super forecasters together and their average P-doom was like 0.12%. But if like I do find evidence that either that study was only one small slice of the super forecaster population, or even those super forecasters have since updated their P-doom upwards over the last 2 years, then I will substantially change my mind based on that.
Yeah, another thing I've heard, so I don't consider myself authoritative on what these super forecasters are thinking. So I am open-minded about it. Like I should update to be more like the super forecasters. But another thing that I've heard is that a lot of these super low predictions came before the ChatGPT revolution.
Yeah, that is true. And I would not super trust any prediction made before, like, say, mid 2023.
Yeah, all right. So we'll put a pin in it. I mean, look, it sounds like we're both open to being convinced. Like I think both of us feel bound by rationality, like by actually incorporating evidence, to defer to a bunch of thoughtful super forecasters. I guess the reason why I haven't gone and researched like the official super forecasters is because I just feel like I follow enough people on social media, namely Twitter, where I do feel like I'm hearing a lot of perspectives, and I don't feel like we're totally not doomed. Doom is less than 1%. I don't feel like that is like the unanimous consensus of people that I respect.
It's definitely not in the level of like crackpot doom predictions in, that we might say like some randos thought that the internet would make humanity go extinct. Like this is actually a substantial portion of experts, of people who've, say, maybe quit leading AI companies, people who've thought a lot about this, even, Nobel Prize winners are saying that, yes, this is a very serious possibility. So obviously, I'm not saying it's like ridiculous. And this entire thing is like, because I take it seriously, I do want to come to an informed conclusion. I guess one area of disagreement, just like in a very meta level between you and me, is that I think that no matter how strongly I hold a prior belief that, humanity is going to be doomed for X and Y reasons, if that belief is just not shared by the experts to the extent there are experts, like if the experts seem to be almost unanimous in saying that that is not true, then I think I'm obligated to drastically reduce my total P doom just
So
on
now
account of
you're
that.
talking about that third base factor now, right?
It's the second and third combined. Like I think that super forecasters have some level of expertise, and also the people in the inside making it have some level of expertise.
Yeah, because the third base factor you mentioned is AI developers and top government officials seem to think we'll be fine. But that doesn't seem like how I would characterize AI developers and top government officials. I mean, don't get me wrong, some of them do absolutely, right? Like Jan LeCun he's actually explicitly said his P Doom is less than 1%. So yeah, he score one for the non-doomer side. But I mean, remember, you mentioned yourself, right? The Center for AI Safety one sentence statement on AI risk, tons of luminaries, right? Even Sam Altman, Dario Demis Hassabis. I mean, key people are at least saying that P Doom sounds like it's at least a few percent, or like they said, it's at least like the risk of nuclear war and pandemics, right? So why are you characterizing, when you're saying AI developers and top government officials seem to think we'll be fine, you mean like maybe half of them, right? Not all of them.
So, okay, I think it's worth clarifying what we mean here. First of all, when I say top government officials, I mean the government officials like in the upper rungs of the intelligence agencies who have privileged access to leading information. I don't think that the average like member of Congress, say, has a better view of PGOOM than I do. And similarly with AI developers, the average person with privileged access at like a high level to how these systems are working. I'm
Mhm.
not even sure that the like modal coder at OpenAI or at Google even has like a very good inside knowledge that somebody else wouldn't.
I feel like privilege access is a very small factor epistemologically these days, because if you think about how much we know today, I don't think there's like a single person alive in even in 2023 who already had as much of an advantage as like somebody like you and I who have no quote unquote privilege access, right? But even the most privileged person in the world with the most intel in the world in 2023 probably didn't know as much about the trajectory as ordinary people know a couple years later.
I would agree with that to some extent. Partially why I think privileged access is so important is that like we are starting to hear like reports that, oh, AGI is achieved internally. And I know that that was a false alarm the first time it was said, but like it's very plausibly true that actually somewhere within these companies, AGI or something very close to it exists. And if you see that and you see how it's actually working, I think that can tell you to a very substantial degree whether risk is real or not.
I think I get what you're saying here. You're basically saying like there's people who are farther along, like looking farther into the future from us because they have inside access into these AI companies. And you would think that if doom were coming down, they would spot it, right? Like they're in the crow's nest of the ship. They would spot the doom and they'd sound the alarm. So there's some evidence of the fact they haven't sounded like a major alarm. But on the other hand, it seems to me like people who have that kind of privileged access are acting a little bit freaked out. I mean, I would actually like to, so to be fair, Dario and Sam Altman, those two particular people seem to be downplaying the extinction threat. But we did get a warning from Dario that the jobs are likely going away.
Well, I think my P, there will be mass automation and unemployment. That's way higher. Nothing that I've seen really convinces me against that.
So I do think that it is rational to incorporate the evidence of like, okay, the Sam Altmans and Darios and the Demis Hassabis of the world, they're not yelling about doom the way I am on my podcast. They're not fear-mongering. I do think that's worth something. And then, of course, you should make another adjustment to be like, well, them personally, it's like a good Hail Mary bet for them, right? Because they are going to live a great life if it goes well. And if it goes badly, well, what can they really do? It's already a race, so they might as well optimize for the case, right? So you can already apply an adjustment for being like, what are their personal incentives, subconsciously and consciously. But if you look at like their employees too, or if you look at like anybody who has privileged access, maybe the government has a hand in this. I know the government's working with these AI companies. So yeah, I mean, you can update on the fact that like nobody's like running in the streets yelling, but it's at the same time, if you look at the trend, it seems like the intensity of the worry is increasing over time, not decreasing.
Yeah, I would agree. And like if that continues to happen, if like even people at the very inside of these companies are starting to get worried and are starting to signal that they're getting worried, then I will certainly update that factor to be much weaker than it is now.
But if that's all it takes, I mean, I hear reports all the time of like, individual after individual signaling that they're worried. The last one I saw was the reviews for Miri's book, the book called If Anyone Builds It, Everyone Dies. And you had like huge names coming out, like Ben Bernanke was saying like, wow, this is a must read. This is a real threat. That guy had some government access. I mean, and there's other people. There's actually like the National Security Advisor said that.
Like, I don't think Ben Bernanke's opinion is the one that matters here. Like, I saw recently like some very notable figure, I forget who, but basically, it was Francis Fukuyama was in the news recently. Like, actually, my mind has been
the book too, by the way,
convinced about AI doom. I think it's a plausible scenario. But like that doesn't really update me. Like,
yeah, so just to give you these names, okay? So forget Ben Bernanke. After all, he was only a Nobel-winning economist and former chairman of the U.S. Federal Reserve. What does he know? But there's R.P. Eddy, the former director of the White House National Security Council, and his quote is, "I wish this wasn't real. Read today, circulate tomorrow, demand the guardrails. I'll keep betting on humanity, but first, we must wake up." So do you really want to say that you're applying a Bayes factor downwards because people who are in the know aren't warning us that we should wake up?
The former, what you said, the head
of...
Yeah,
so his title here is former director, White House National Security Council.
Okay, that does update me more in the direction of doom. If that guy is saying
Oh, nice. Okay, let me take another bite at the apple. All right. So Suzanne Spalding, former Undersecretary, Department of Homeland Security, she is writing a review saying, "The authors raise an incredibly serious issue that merits, really demands our attention. You don't have to agree with the predictions or prescriptions in this book, nor do you have to be tech or AI savvy to find it fascinating, accessible, and thought-provoking." Okay, so maybe that's not like I have a 99% P-doom, but isn't that like enough of what you're getting in terms of like, hey, the people who would know, right? I mean, if you're using the privilege information argument, so what I'm getting from this is like, okay, well, there's no additional piece of privilege information saying we're 5 times more doomed than I thought, but there's also no piece of privilege information saying we're totally not doomed.
Yeah. I think maybe you're getting to me. Maybe I should weaken that 0.2 to like, I don't know, 0.4 or something.
I mean, I think that my intuition, you're a young guy. So maybe if you live longer, you may develop an intuition that like the grownups are usually also kind of like winging it, right? They're using open source intel. Like, so the thing is that like the Gorns of the world, right? Like the Asperger's hyper smart nerd in their mom's basement, no offense, Gorn, those people generally, they can actually just be more insightful and more at the front of the pack than people whose official title is whatever, Secretary of Homeland Security.
Yeah, in general, I would agree with that. And like certainly if the argument is that, you know, a bunch of smart people believe that AI doom is a very serious thing, then you don't need to convince me about that. Like I'm already well convinced that like some very intelligent people probably smarter than I'll ever be, believe strongly in AI doom.
Yeah. So I'm just not loving the base factors, is what I'm saying. Like, it just, it just seems like you tack them on. And I mean, don't get me wrong, my doom train is kind of ad hoc too, right? So I just feel like maybe there should just be one doom train, right? Everything should just be a stop, and we should try to make all the stops as close to independent variables as we can, even though we know we're going to fail. At least we can try. And I just don't think there should be like a separate category of base factors.
I still think there should be, just because like, again, to give a very different example, and I know it's not a perfect analogy, but like imagine that my prior was that, vaccines are evil, and if I inject a vaccine, then like it'll make me grow horns or something. I should still, if I'm reasoning properly, after seeing the expert consensus saying that vaccines are overwhelmingly safe, I should still update from my, 99% vaccines dangerous belief to something like below 10% that vaccines are dangerous. And I think that's even the case. Obviously, AI doom is a much more plausible argument than like anti-vaxxer stuff. But I still think that I hold this belief that humanity will be doomed like within 10 years, and the experts don't agree with me. I still think that no matter how strongly I believed in that, I should have a way to update down.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, this idea of like when to defer to experts, it's a valuable topic. It's unfortunately a complex topic, a topic with a lot of debate. I can tell you, me personally, in my experience, it's just when I feel like I grasp the logic of an argument in my own life experience, generally the experts don't come in and shock me that much at that point. Like, don't get me wrong, sometimes I will update. I'll be like, oh my God, the rationalists know so much better about, I don't even know, like what kind of diet to eat, right? Like they, compared to like mainstream, you just follow all the rationalist diet recommendations. Like, oh wait, some of the mainstream recommendations work a little better. So I have updated back and forth potentially, but I've never felt like totally ignorant by not listening to experts if I can critique the logic itself. That's my own life experience. Take it for what it's worth. The point of my podcast, Doom Debates, is actually to shine a light on who are the so-called experts and just show everybody that, like, look, everybody is winging it, or like everybody is doing their best, working with like a very vague combination of doom train stops. I mean, you can see the different people on my podcast. Sure, I don't have White House level staff yet, right? Give me a little time to climb the ranks in my podcast, but I do have superstars like Professor David Duvineau, University of Toronto, who's worked closely with Jeffrey Hinton, who's collected a bunch, like not a Turing Award, but like a best paper award at a conference. Like that guy is like full of credentials, and he's basically saying that my stops on the doom train check out.
Like again, I'm not denying that like there's a lot of just very impressive expert level people who agree with you. I still think that just the two categories of people who I think are like the most relevant if we're going to give expertise to anyone are A, the Superforecasters, and B, the people who currently have privileged information, like currently working in high levels of national security and high levels at leading AI labs. And like, those are the two groups of people who I would be like most impressed or would be most willing to change my mind, like if I heard different reports from them.
Well, I consider it a very significant piece of evidence that surveys of people working in the AI industry seem to show that the median doom probability is like greater than 10%. Especially when you correct for the idea of like, these people would be selected for and incentivized to be optimistic. I mean, they literally all have millions of dollars riding on the optimism thesis.
Yeah. That's fair.
The other thing I wanted to say about my podcast, people who watch the episodes of my podcast, and the reason I'm doing this is to show people that not only do you have superstars like David Duvineau who are like, yep, the doom argument checks out, and then I do what's called borrowed credibility, right? It's like it came out of his mouth, not mine. Okay, I'm just the host. The other thing to notice from my podcast is when you look at all the non-doomers, and some of them are very smart. I mean, Professor Robin Hanson, Professor Scott Sumner, more professors on the way. Gary Marcus. All of these different people, they're all intelligent non-doomers, but you can see that their different non-doomer arguments don't even line up. So even the non-doom thesis, it's not like there's this one canonical expert non-doom consensus, right? Compared to like the consensus of like why vaccines are good. It's like people are on the same page. It's like, well, it helps your body, get resistant to the infection, right? It's like a much more gears level model.
I would actually be very curious to know, of the super forecasters who like do not believe in doom, or are they all on the same page of like why doom is not likely? Like if, say, a third of them believe that AGI just isn't coming soon, and then a third of them believed it is coming soon, but it'll be aligned, and then a third of them believed, okay, it is coming soon and it won't be aligned by default, but with enough alignment efforts, we can make it work. If like that was like such a stark break where they actually don't really agree on that much, that would probably reduce the amount that I would trust them.
Yeah, so you totally don't get that kind of unity. That's actually the reason I started my podcast. I named it Doom Debates. I was originally going to name it Doom Train because I want to highlight it's not a two-sided thing. It's not doom versus non-doom. It's this whole train. It's all these little sub-arguments and people are just getting off all over the place. And yeah, I mean, it's just, I would just not frame it the way your Bayes factors seem to be phrasing it of like, hey, the experts are telling us not to worry. It's like, watch my podcast to see what the experts are saying. You may get a different idea.
So, okay, here's something I'll tell you. Is that like as we've been talking, I have like mentally been like, yeah, maybe my Bayes factors are stronger than they should have been. So like I updated the 0.75 to 0.8, the 0.2 to 0.4, and like the 0.6 to 0.7. And after I do that, my PGUM goes from like 3% to 8%. So I think you can take some victory in like, okay, you updated my PGUM up 5% from what it was.
Awesome. Yeah. And that's, from it's actually like more useful generally to analyze these more as odds ratios than percent probabilities because that jump from 3 to 8, it feels like 5%, but it's actually the jump from like 33 to 1 odds. And now we're down to like 13 to 1 odds.
Sure.
Which is huge, right? It's like equivalent to the jump from like 50% to more than 90% or like something like that, like a huge jump, right? It could be a 40% jump, maybe more than 80%. So we got to think in terms of odds ratios. Now you got to 8%, which I'm super thankful for. I mean, this is like I think you probably hold the record of like the most meaningful update after having a conversation with me for going from 3% to 8%. And I'm willing to squeak you into what I call the sane zone. I normally say it's 10 to 90%, but I'm willing to give you a grace period or what do you call it, like a margin of error, so that as long as you're more than 5%, I'll consider you essentially being in the sane zone. It's just when you query your intuition is still pushing back. It's still like 13 to 1 that we're not doomed. It's not like a little bit more flexible.
Like my intuition is pretty flexible. But yeah, just my gut feeling, even like before considering any of all that we just talked about, my gut feeling is still that like, yeah, about 5% chance that we're doomed, 95% that we'll be fine.
95%. So 19 to 1. Because like I said, it does seem more extreme when you phrase it as 19 to 1, right? So like my $19,000 to your 1,000, right? If we were making a bet. Or it would actually be your 19,000 to my 1,000, right? So I get a $19,000 payout if the world ends.
Like, I'm not saying that my gut is the most reliable thing in the world, but like, yeah, that's what my gut tells me, that 19 to 1 odds is that we'll be fine.
So you almost see this as a theoretical exercise, this whole doom thing.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah, I feel, I mean, because I think it always is weird to me when people are like, yeah, I'm open-minded, I'm open to anything could happen. But I'm 19 to 1 that we're going to survive. I mean, that's a pretty rigorous level of confidence. I mean, you can make a lot of life decisions with 19. You can buy a house if you're 19 to 1 certain that you're not going to move in the next few years. Go ahead and buy a house, right? I mean, that's a nice, solid level of confidence.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm not confident in any particular future coming true. Like, that 19 to 1 is split between, there's a 15% chance we just won't even get AGI, and then there's a certain chance that we get AGI and it goes perfectly, and then there's a non-negligible chance that like we're about to get misalignment, but then we pull through at the last minute and then we have some sort of pause. So like, I can't tell you like with any degree of confidence what the future will look like. It just seems like the range of futures where we end up mostly fine is a lot more plausible than the range of futures where we like are doomed.
Okay. I think that's a good place to leave the doom train. I'm really happy with how you rolled with the punches and really reflected on your own beliefs and why you have them and what it would take to update you. I mean, you're clearly a strong rationalist in the making here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Moving into the wrap up here, in addition to thinking pretty rigorously about your P-Doom and the Doom train, you also think a lot about AI policy and how we should go about laying down some useful policies, whether we're doomed or not. You kind of think about the whole space. So tell the viewers what insights you've learned from that kind of thinking.
Sure. So I think that in general, like the policies you would support at 1% versus 5% versus like even 15% doom are actually like largely sort of similar. And even if I had like a much higher P doom of like 80%, still many of the policies would be the same, which is just like maybe we should have some more public sector support for AI research. So that the people who want to be doing AI safety work and mechanistic interpretability work should have the opportunity to do so, even if it's not like immediately market incentivized, for the same reasons that governments always support public goods projects. Uh, for that reason, also, public funding compute resources like NAIRR, which is basically just a public compute cluster that people doing public facing research can access. Just generally having stricter cybersecurity at leading AI labs and publishing their safety and security protocols. Also, increasing our human capital is always a good thing to do in any circumstance, but especially we need the most talented humans possible to handle AI safely. And also, I do buy into a large extent to the national security arguments of I do think we should be competing with China and making sure that America stays ahead on that.
It sounds like your strongest overarching point, which I agree with, is that whether your P-Doom is 2% or 98% or anything in between, there's a lot of policies that you've called, I think, Pareto optimal, right?
Yes, basically, for those who are not familiar in economics, like a Pareto optimal solution is something that's like better for all people, or at least it doesn't make anybody worse than what happened beforehand. And I think that there's a bunch of policies on the table that are Pareto optimal in the sense that whether you're an accelerationist, whether you are a safetyist or a doomer, or whether you are a national security hawk, these policies are simply good policies that make everybody better off. And we should be pursuing those policies.
So my question for you is, you're pointing out that all these policies are Pareto optimal. Do you think that people are leaving low-hanging fruit on the table, or do you think that both sides of the discussion are actually doing a good job on pushing forward the Pareto optimal policies?
No, I think there's a ton of just low-hanging fruit on the table that I think anybody who's like very seriously engaging with the issue should support. And I think it's just a combination of inertia. It's just hard to get the government to take action. And also just other concerns totally unrelated to AI are getting in the way. Like increasing human capital through immigration is great whether you're like an accelerationist or a safety person.
Yeah, it's a general rule of government, democratic government, that there's so much waste and there's plenty of times when you can like prove that a certain policy would work better, like letting market forces work in more places, that kind of thing. And we just fail to do it. And Brian Kaplan has a really good general reason why, which is that governments always do things that sound good and not so much things that work good, because the voting is done based on what sounds good. And then Brian Kaplan loves corporations because corporations are out there doing things that don't always sound good, but then they do work good. So that's why Brian loves corporations more than government. And I tend to agree, but it sounds like that same effect of government leaving money on the table because some things sound better, it sounds like that is impacting all of these like obviously good policies about AI. So I'm not that optimistic that they're going to improve, but maybe your point is that if we can all just agree that the AI issue is important, whether it's going to be optimistic or pessimistic, then let's at least prioritize these win-win AI policies and like downplay things that aren't AI related that people normally fight about.
Yeah, my basic mode is just that as long as there is low-hanging fruit on the table, I'm going to reach for that low-hanging fruit. And then if and when the low-hanging fruit eventually gets picked, then I'll reorient myself towards some maybe tougher battles.
Gotcha. So it sounds like you're going to graduate and have a really nice career in AI policy, right? Is that kind of how you see yourself?
That's definitely one of the paths I'm strongly considering, and I'm getting into the DC AI policy world making any plans, 2027 or later is kind of impossible at this point, but I think there's a very likely future in which I'm some kind of policy analyst, think tank worker, or even lobbyist of some kind.
So in 2 or 3 years, I'm going to be on this podcast telling the next college student, Liam Robbins from the Department of AI Policy is warning us that AI doom is 8%. Don't you want to take him seriously? All right, nice. So that is all the topics we wanted to hit. And I think the viewers are with me that it's impressive that you're having this discussion just being in college. I think most of us in college were not even engaged with important topics to this degree. So yeah, keep up the good work, man. And thanks so much for coming on the show and riding the doom train.
Thanks for having me.